So it's both an honor and a lot of fun for me to introduce one of my heroes, John Podesta. So Mr. Podesta brings to this stage wisdom gained from a remarkable career. In the 1990s, he served as Chief of Staff to the President of the United States. In the last decade, Mr. Podesta founded the Center for American Progress, which under his leadership became one of the most respected think tanks in Washington with deep and profound impacts on the national agenda. In 2008 and early 2009, John Podesta served as co-chair of the Obama-Biden transition, where he won widespread praise for his work under enormous pressure. And today, Mr. Podesta serves as counselor to President Obama, and I can tell you that around the Obama administration and Washington, there were a lot of happy people when John agreed to serve in this job. I actually don't use the term hero lightly, but I can tell you there are several generations of Washingtonians whose careers have been shaped by John Podesta, who look up to and admire John Podesta, and who have learned time and time again from his example. So I count myself among them, and I'm honored to present to you John Podesta.
Good afternoon, everyone. And that was quite an introduction. I'm not quite used to that, David. So thank you. You're too kind. It is really great to be here. I almost didn't make it, but I did make it. LaGuardia being what it is. I'm glad that our national energy infrastructure is better than our airport infrastructure in New York City. But it is really a tremendous opportunity to be here. At the first birthday party of the Center on Global Energy Policy. I caught the tail end of Jim Rogers' talk, and I have to say, Jim, I long to use the term retirement, but I'll remember the reinvention part. I know from personal experience that in building the Center for American Progress, as David noted, how much thought and planning and hard work it takes to stand up a thoughtful, policy-relevant research institute. And given the rapid pace of change in energy policy and in energy technology, this center has a particularly challenging task before it. It's just been 1 year since it was launched, but already the Center for Global Energy Policy has already become really a go-to place for policymakers for its thoughtful and rigorous analysis of the issues. And of course, it's great public conversations like the one you all are having here today. So I want to begin by congratulating Jason Bordoff and David Sandelow and the rest of the team for a tremendous first year. It's always great to see friends succeed, and you guys, I think, are really knocking it out of the park, so congratulations. And thank you for having me here today. I'm eager to take your questions, so I'll keep my remarks short. I want to reflect briefly on the President's approach to energy policy and to share with you some updates on the climate action plan that the President laid out last summer. This has been a busy week for us who are working on energy and climate, and there's more to come this week, and I'll have a couple things to say about that. As you all know, the United States is, of course, in the midst of a domestic boom in our production of both oil and natural gas. We've surpassed Russia in production of natural gas. It's projected that we will continue to lead the world in natural gas production through 2030. For 6 straight months now, we've produced more oil domestically than we've imported from overseas. The U.S. is the top oil and gas producer globally. Domestic energy production has created 133,000 jobs in the last 3 years, and those numbers are projected to keep growing. That's good news for our economy, which you will hear more about from Jim Stock, a member of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, who's on the panel to follow. And it puts us on the right path forward as we take on the climate challenge. Electricity production fueled by natural gas throws off half the CO2 pollution as coal-fired power plants. Responsibly extracted and carefully transported natural gas provides a credible bridge for an economy powered by dirty carbon-intense fossil fuels to a low-carbon and ultimately no-carbon energy future. I want to be clear, like all fossil fuels, natural gas production poses challenges. In particular, methane leaks at all stages of natural gas production and distribution are a cause of serious concern. Methane is the second most prevalent greenhouse gas emitted in the United States, and though it lingers in the atmosphere for less time than carbon dioxide does, it's more potent, pound for pound. Methane has a climate change impact that's 20 times greater than CO2 over a 100-year period. That's why the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Energy have been working with oil and natural gas companies to adopt proven cost-effective technologies to reduce methane emissions at all stages of production, storage, and distribution. And the White House recently released a methane strategy designed to reduce harmful emissions of that potent greenhouse gas during natural gas production and transportation. Many aspects of natural gas and oil production are regulated at the state level, as probably most of the people in this room know. But as part of the administration's methane strategy, the EPA is soliciting expert input on how best to reduce methane emissions from the oil and natural gas sector. Later this year, the Bureau of Land Management at the Department of Interior will propose updated standards to reduce venting and flaring from oil and gas production on public lands. The strategy also includes message for controlling methane emissions from other sources, including landfills, coal mines, and agricultural production. So even as we're producing more oil and natural gas at home, we're also cutting our energy use. I want to underscore that. We're also making we're cutting our energy use dramatically by boosting energy efficiency. Improvements in efficiency, from fuel economy standards to better building codes to energy-saving devices to higher standards, have been driving down the amount of energy necessary to produce a dollar's worth of goods or services, a measure that economists refer to as energy intensity in the economy. Domestic oil and natural gas is only one side of the energy production coin. During President Obama's time in office, we've also seen a truly historic expansion of renewable energy, particularly wind and solar. The amount of energy produced from wind power has tripled. Solar power production has increased by tenfold in the time that the president has been in office. We've gone from virtually zero renewable energy produced on public lands to permitting enough solar to power 6 million homes, along with policies to produce more energy from both onshore and offshore wind, as well as geothermal. And distributed solar power has been booming at the same time. Every 4 minutes last year, another home or business went solar. The truth is, we've been fueling our economy in ways that are harmful to the environment, in ways that spew carbon pollution into the atmosphere, in ways that raise temperatures and sea levels. But there's no silver bullet that will take us from a carbon-intensive energy sector to a low-carbon energy sector overnight. We have to be honest about that, and we have to be practical about that. This is how we make progress. It takes time. It can be hard. It's often more piecemeal than we'd like. It takes public will, and it takes private action. We have to keep pushing for the best outcome in the medium and long term, but that doesn't mean we can give up on any particular strategy. And it's important, more important than ever, that we keep pushing forward on these issues. Earlier this week, the administration released the third National Climate Assessment. More than 300 scientists from the public and private sectors worked for 4 years to produce the assessment, which provides the most granular information we've ever had about how climate change is already impacting the United States and what various regions can expect to see in the future. More torrential downpours in the Northeast, sea level rise and coastal erosion in the Southeast, more drought in the Southwest and hotter forest fires, a longer growing season in the agricultural Midwest, but also more extreme weather events that can cut production, more ocean acidification. In many places, these effects are already being felt and will only get worse in the years ahead. The president has said many times, and he said it to a lot of weather forecasters in a bunch of interviews in the Rose Garden on Tuesday, that he believes that we have a moral imperative to act on climate change. That we must not leave the planet that is damaged and degraded, that our children and grandchildren deserve better. That's why last June, as I noted, the President released his Climate Action Plan, which aims to mitigate climate impacts through reducing greenhouse gas emissions, to build resilience in American communities to the climate impacts we know are coming, and to lead on the international stage to find global solutions to what is truly a global challenge. I see my friend Lord Mandelson in the front row. I'm sure he'll be talking about that in the panel to follow. Beyond scaling up renewable energy and transitioning to lower carbon fossil fuels like natural gas, we've been working hard to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through a variety of methods. We instituted historical fuel economy standards for passenger vehicles, as well as the first ever standards for heavy-duty trucks. Those standards will cut 6 billion tons of CO2 pollution, reduce oil consumption by 12 billion barrels, and save consumers $1.7 trillion over the lifetime of the program. We're raising efficiency standards for commercial and home appliances. Just today, DOE issued final standards for electric motors and walk-in coolers and freezers that will cut carbon pollution by 158 million metric tons and save consumers and businesses $26 billion on their electric bills. And the EPA is on track. We're all hard at work at this, but the EPA is on track to release draft rules in early June to reduce carbon pollution from existing power plants. I refer to this as the crown jewel of the Climate Action Plan. Power plants produce fully 1/3 of the carbon pollution in the U.S. each year and are the single largest source of carbon dioxide emissions in the country. Reducing those emissions is important for the health of our environment, the health of our people, and the health of our economy in the long term. And reducing carbon emissions from power plants is one of the best means we have to reach the President's goal of reducing emissions in the range of 17% relative to 2005 levels by 2020, a pledge he made in Copenhagen. We're also working hard to help American communities build more resilient infrastructure and better plan for future climate impacts, and we're getting the private and philanthropic sectors to join us in that effort. Recently, we built on the administration's long history of open data projects and launched the Climate Data Initiative by releasing more than 100 large data sets, maps, and other resources on sea level rise and coastal flooding. Not only can innovators and entrepreneurs go to climate.data.gov to access that information and build new tools for the public, but we partnered with a host of companies and organizations from Google and Microsoft to the geospatial technology company Esri that's actually working right now to provide better public service on the tornado-stricken South, to the World Bank and the Rockefeller Foundation, who have all made serious commitments to make resources and platforms available for this critical work. I refer to this as maps and apps. Very important, I think, going forward for our communities to be able to plan for the future. On the international stage, the U.S. is leading the charge to end public financing for conventional coal-fired power plants overseas, except in the poorest countries. Recently, the Netherlands and the UK joined us in that commitment. We're also actively engaged in bilateral talks with partners who will be critical in curbing climate change, including China and India. David and I were in China last fall and to try to further that dialogue. Now I sit with an official hat, and I'm still at work at it. And recognizing that that climate change is a security challenge as well as an environmental and an economic challenge, Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel just recently and prominently, including discussions of climate change and natural disaster response in the first meeting of ASEAN defense ministers on U.S. soil. Tomorrow, the President will be making some big announcements on new commitments from both the federal government and the private sector to improve energy efficiency in buildings and to expand solar power, particularly distributed solar, while he's out in California. So I'd pay attention to the news tomorrow. I think we have some good things happening and good announcements coming. Taking on climate change and transitioning to a cleaner energy future is going to require an all-hands-on-deck effort from the public sector and the private sector, from researchers and activists, from committed students like many of those who I know are in the audience here today. And it's going to take the research and engagement of organizations like the Center for Global Energy Policy. It's, in my view, perhaps the biggest challenge facing the world. So Jason and David, thanks for taking it on. Thank you again for having me. And I think I have some time for questions. I think, Jason, we're going to do that up here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, John, and thanks for being here today and on short notice and for dealing with traffic problems. A lot of things to cover. That was really great and comprehensive. You touched on this early in your remarks, but I just want to give you a chance to say one more word about it, which is the all of the above approach to energy and what that phrase means. So we have an oil and gas boom happening in this country, not just natural gas, and that's displaced coal. We have an oil and gas boom, and the president has spoken favorably about increasing domestic production. At the same time, we saw this week the urgency with which we need to deal with climate change. So I was wondering if you could talk about what the phrase all of the above means. I think some people, when they think about it, view those things as irreconcilable or being in tension. And can we do both, and should we do both?
Well, Dana Milbank referred to me as sounding like Dick Cheney for comments like that. But I think for a lot of reasons we have to do and pursue multiple strategies at the same time. I think the oil and gas boom right now in the U.S. has been, as I said, a boon for the economy. It creates a sense of energy security for our country. It's produced low pricing for natural gas, which has both helped in the manufacturing sector as well as reduced bills for consumers in the production of electricity. It's also reduced CO2 emissions. So we've reduced since 2006 we've had more reduction of CO2 emissions in the United States than any other country on the planet. And that's in part because of the fact that we've done fuel switching, I think, in the electricity sector, along with the other parts of the all of the above strategy. And I underscore what I said earlier, which is making our economy use energy more efficiently. And I think that the big gains we've seen in the transportation sector, now in the built sector, we're having a Better Building Summit in Washington, which I left to come up here. And the president will be making some announcements about more both public commitment to that, the federal government, which is the largest user of energy as an entity in the world, I guess, and as well as some major private sector commitments to reduce their energy by 20% by 2020. Those are, multiple strategies. They go along with the other elements that I mentioned that come from the Climate Action Plan that begin to transition the U.S. economy to one that's more efficient, more productive, using lower carbon intense fuels to fuel the economy, and ultimately move towards an electric system that is going to have to be literally carbon free. Now that can happen through the use of fossil fuels if we get the carbon capture and sequestration or utilization right. That's a ways off, in my opinion, still. But there's research support for that. But primarily, we're going to have to find sources of energy that move, particularly the electricity sector, to essentially a carbon-free system.
And you mentioned the sort of crown jewel of the Climate Action Plan, the EPA rules, and so I know they haven't been proposed yet, so you won't tell us too much about what they'll say, but what can you say about what people should expect, what they're trying to achieve? 40% of the electricity mix still comes from coal. You can't, you don't want to turn that off overnight. How should we think about what they're trying to achieve and how flexible they can be in terms of a tool?
Well, Gina McCarthy, our EPA administrator, has been all across the country talking to stakeholders, from political officials, governors, state regulators, to affected utilities, to stakeholders across every sector of the economy, as well as advocates for a lower carbon future. And she has produced a draft of a proposal which is now at the White House. It's under review in the interagency process. The president asked that proposal be released by the first week of June, I think we're on track to meet that deadline. And what that's going to end up doing is regulating CO2 as a pollutant, the way we have regulated other harmful pollutants, arsenic, mercury, other, NOx and SOx. And it's being done through a section of the Clean Air Act that requires states essentially to implement the reductions. So different states have different mixes, they have different opportunities, they have approached this problem in different ways. Up here in the Northeast, there's a mass-based system called RGGI that combines states to try to get overall CO2 reductions. Other states will take a different approach. But the rule will be flexible enough to produce, to give states the flexibility they need based on their own circumstances, their own mix of facilities, but to begin to regulate those emissions from existing power plants, again, to get on track to meet aggressive targets, but do it in a flexible way that can be cost effective, and ultimately in a way that the benefits of the rule will far exceed the costs that are going to be imposed. I think this is one of the rules, in my experience in the federal government, that has one of the biggest benefit to cost ratios that I've seen come through the system, because there are both benefits from reducing the CO2 from a climate perspective, but there are also very, very substantial public health benefits that'll flow from having a cleaner electricity generation system.
There's a question here about public acceptance of shale development and hydraulic fracturing. Obviously highly controversial, as you know. What do you think are the greatest risks to shale development? Do you think regulations, state and federal now, are where they need to be? If not, where do they need to be improved? And how can we build more public acceptance toward development of that resource?
Well, look, I think that, first and foremost, it's up to there are different layers of regulation, and the thing that I think has been of greatest concern to the public is starting with the lack of transparency on the fluids that go into fracking the rock to release the hydrocarbons, and the potential for particularly groundwater pollution. That's largely been left to the states to regulate. I think that states have taken different approaches on this. I think that it is, the EPA is still doing, it does research, although they don't regulate in that area. They're doing research on how to, maintain and develop better and best practices in that regard. But I think there has to be transparency. States have to step up to the plate and do a good job with this. I think the companies have to be, come forward with, but both by implementing best practices and to some extent being more transparent with the public about what their activities are doing. There are a host of other issues, from breaking up of landscapes to the effects of methane leakage in the development of oil and gas. That's what I mentioned in my opening comments. That's a place where the federal government has an important role to play. I mentioned the methane strategy we recently released, which is a multi-sector strategy, includes agriculture, landfills, et cetera, but it pays particular attention to oil and gas production and transportation. There's a lot of leakage also in the transportation system. We have a big challenge ahead of us in replacing aging pipes, et cetera. But at the production level, EPA is engaged now in an exercise in which they've released a number of white papers. They're asking for expert comment. They're looking towards moving forward in the fall with trying to determine what the right path forward is to ensure that methane leakage is kept to a minimum. The Department of Interior is also in the process of issuing regulations that would reduce flaring and venting from production that occurs on public lands. So those are two very big initiatives, but with the same aim, which is to minimize the leakage that comes from oil and gas production, all the way from production to collection to transportation and distribution. And I think that the Department of Energy has a pretty cooperative relationship, particularly with a number of the big players in both the production and transportation side. They're looking at, when David was at the department, they put a lot of money into better technology for, at every stage of the production and distribution side. So, I think we can do it safely, but we have to be vigilant about trying to have the best practices, and that requires commitment from every level of government and from the companies themselves.
One of the results of the tight oil boom we've seen is a dramatic increase in the amount of oil we're moving by the greatest innovation of the 19th century, the locomotive. We saw yet another derailment and explosion last week. Yesterday, in fact, the administration announced new notification rules for trains carrying Bakken crude. I was wondering if you could talk about the issue. Do you think stronger federal regulations are needed for moving oil by rail? Do you think the recent rail accidents are an indication more pipelines are needed?
Short answer is yes. I think that the Department of Transportation has, again, just sent over to the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs a draft proposal that would improve rail car safety in particular. And I'm probably not an expert in anything, but I'm certainly not an expert in this. But Bakken crude in particular is highly flammable for reasons that Dan Yergin can explain. So the big explosions we've seen up in the Bakken area have resulted in major fires, though. But there was a very substantial incident in Virginia just this last week. So rail car safety, I think, is something that's really a top of the agenda item for the Secretary of Transportation. And as I said, they've been developing, in addition to the notification rules, they've been developing new safety rules for the rail cars themselves. The Canadians are also, which also move and have suffered from the same problem of rail car explosion and massive fires, are also in the process of updating and strengthening their rail car safety rules as well.
And another policy issue that's arisen as a result of how quickly the U.S. energy landscape has changed is energy exports. The U.S. Energy Department has approved 7 applications to export LNG. The question of the restriction on crude oil exports has also come up, even though we're still a net importer because of the way our refineries are configured and the kind of oil we're producing in the U.S. versus what our refineries are configured to take. I'm wondering if you could speak to each of those in terms of where the LNG export approval process is headed. Should we expect those approvals to continue on the pace they've been? And then for crude oil exports, how does the administration think about the issue?
Well, we've done, there are different regimes for exporting to countries for which the U.S. has a free trade agreement and which it doesn't. But so in the non-FTA countries, there's a process at the Department of Energy to give preliminary licenses, and then there's a further process at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and a final approval by the Energy Department. And they've did a preliminary assessment about how much exports to non-FTA countries would be consistent with a national interest finding, including what the impact would be on domestic price, manufacturing, consumer pricing, et cetera. And they've moved forward with preliminary licenses, if you will. Those are now mostly moving through FERC. One's been granted and is in the process of being built to Cheniere in the Gulf region. But the total volume, to give you some indication of this, total volume of exports that would be permitted under those preliminary licenses is equal to the total amount of LNG that the EU currently imports, about the amount that Qatar, the leading country that exports LNG, exports. And it's about half the Russian imports into the EU today. So they're very, very substantial amounts that have already been licensed for export, but those facilities take some time to be built. So the one that's gone all the way through the process and is in the throes of being built, the one I mentioned, won't be online till I think the end of 2015. But between 2015 and 2018, I think you could see much more substantial natural gas exports from the U.S. to, the market will decide where those exports go. There's been a lot of discussion about this because of the situation in the Ukraine, but the market ultimately will decide where those exports go. But putting that gas into the global system, I think, will help, even if the end destination for the gas is, if you look at the economics, maybe more likely is to Asia. Having that gas in the global system will help relieve pressure and provide alternatives across Europe, which needs to, I think, improve its energy security, particularly vis-a-vis Russia. So I think we're on track for that. With respect to oil exports, there's some oil exports that currently go on today under presidential waivers and because they're not passing through federal pipelines. But we're taking an active look at what the production looks like, particularly in Eagle Ford in Texas, and whether the current refinery capacity in the U.S. can absorb the capacity to increase to refine the product that's being produced through the boom in the Bakken and Eagle Ford and other areas around the country. I see Dan Poneman standing off the side, our Deputy Secretary of Energy, and he'll correct anything that I misspoke about. But we're taking a look at that and deciding whether there's the potential for effectively and economically utilizing that resource through a variety of different mechanisms.
Yeah, Dan Poneman is there, and Sharif Suki, the CEO of Cheniere, is here as well. So 2015, is that right? That's when the first project for LNG exports. Well, so we got one thing right. Tell us what the Quadrennial Energy Review is and what it will look like and what your hopes are for and what it aims to achieve.
Yeah, we've got lots of quadrennial reviews now in the government, built around the Quadrennial Defense Review, which is an extremely important planning document for the Pentagon to kind of scope what the future looks like and size both the force and the platform development process based on a national strategy in the defense area. That has caused other agencies of government and the president to focus on the methodology as an important input to federal policy making. So there's a quadrennial diplomacy and development review, and now there's a quadrennial energy review, which the president asked that the Office of Science and Technology Policy and the Domestic Policy Council at the White House lead, but the bulk of the work is really being undertaken by the Department of Energy. And in the energy review process, it's a little bit of a misnomer because it's over the course of 4 years, we're looking at strategies around some specific cuts in the energy field. The first one, and the new QER as we refer to it, is looking at transportation and distribution, both from a security perspective against a multitude of threats, cyber, terrorism, but particularly extreme weather events, to look towards the future of where the energy system's going and decide where greater investment needs to shift to. And again, it's a sort of a massive interagency undertaking to begin to map where we are and where we need to be in the as I said, in the distribution, transmission, and transportation of energy, and it's across all the sectors. Electricity, gas, oil, etc.
One last question, and then we'll move to Deputy Secretary Poneman. I wanted to ask you just a little bit more sort of personally, can you tell us how you personally became so committed to the issue of climate change, given how many issues you deal with at the Center for American Progress now in government? You have a particular passion for the issue, it seems to the public, I think. Can you talk a little bit about where that comes from?
Well, I've done a lot of, I've done a lot of different things over the course of my career. I was in the earlier part of my career, I spent much more of my time on another topic that has really become front and center today, which is electronic surveillance and the questions around intelligence gathering, and I'm still working on that. But during my time in the Clinton White House, I really became an advocate for both. I developed a greater understanding about the challenge of climate change and an advocate for changing our energy system to react to that. And so I guess I was the green chief of staff amongst the 4 chiefs of staff who served President Clinton. And I carried that work forward and have made, particularly climate and energy, an important pillar of the work that the Center for American Progress did under my leadership and now does under Neera Tanden, who's the new president and CEO at CAP's leadership. So I think we've been important active players. I think some of the policies we developed in the period in 2006, 2005, 2006, 2007 were critical during the transition, which I led for President Obama in terms of having kind of off-the-shelf ideas on where greater investment could occur. So I'm proud of that. And now, having resisted for a while, I'm sort of back on the saddle and have responsibility in the White House to coordinate the work of the White House offices, including the Council on Environmental Quality, the Domestic Policy Council, the National Security staff that are working on climate and energy, along with OSTP, which was the lead on the National Climate Assessment that I mentioned.
That's great. Well, I know from the people still there how much sense of mission and purpose they have as a legacy issue to deal with climate change and also to get the policy choices right that have arisen as a result of how quickly the U.S. Energy landscape has changed. I know to all of the people still there how much you've brought to that effort and how grateful everyone is. So, and we're also grateful to you for being here today. So please join me in thanking John Podesta.
Thank you.